So our new business tonight is HARB 2017-19, which is 326 Luella coming back in front of the board from last month. So if you'd like to give us a little bit of detail on some of the changes and what's proposed.
Let me spread these out first for reference. That looks good. Well, good evening. I do really appreciate, honestly, you're inviting us back on continuance to review some of the issues that we reviewed at the last meeting. I'm Christopher Miller, John Milner Architects, a principal there. And tonight I'm joined, I'll just introduce, Ed was here at the last meeting from our office. He's the project architect that's been working with me. And this is Karen Reese, the homeowner. And so we will hopefully have a discussion here. I'll lead it, but if there's any input that Ed and Karen would like to provide, that would be welcome too. What I wanted to do first was just to let you know what we've done since we last were before you. And we went to the Athenaeum. We had reviewed everything at the Athenaeum online at first, but after our meeting, we went to the Athenaeum. I met with Bruce Laverty, the curator there. We reviewed the Wendell and Smith account books. We reviewed the Trumbauer archives. We reviewed historic photographs, and I did that with Bruce, and we went through everything. I also just reviewed that information that we gathered with Greg Pritchard afterwards, just to see if he had any additional input. One of the interesting things that I didn't know, and I learned from Bruce, is that Greg had worked at the Athenaeum for several years, and he said actually is an authority on Wendell and Smith, probably the foremost authority, because on these speculation houses that were built in this period, Greg has a lot of knowledge, and so that was a valuable piece of information. We went back to the carriage house structure. I'll call it the carriage barn. That's the historic stable structure, and just reviewed interior, exterior, the details, looked at it more again closely, just to be able to respond. We surveyed the front facade of the existing house because you probably saw in the information that we provided that we included a front facade from the street that shows the house and it shows the proposed garage structure. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we considered ways to reduce the mass. I mean, that was one of the things that we talked about at the last meeting, and we really wanted to think about that and to see if there were ways to reduce the mass. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I thought the best way to do it might be just to review your questions. And maybe we can either review, I counted sort of 4 kinds of questions that we discussed at the last meeting. 2 were related to the carriage barn. The other 2 were related to the new garage. So I'm going to kind of go in that order with the carriage barn first. And I'll just read these questions as I kind of remembered them from my notes. And then we can, I have some comments and we can discuss them if you wish. The question was the carriage barn structure designed by the same architect, Horace Trumbauer, who designed the original house, as he is considered to be an important architect in the district and region? And that was Bob's questions. And was it designed at the same time as the original house? So obviously we went back through all of that. We tried to revisit all of those issues by looking at the Wendell and Smith account books, which indicate that Horace Trumbauer designed the house very clearly. They also indicate in great detail that the house was built in 1892 and 93. They give literally, it's almost like a construction schedule. So that's wonderful information. We also verified that Trumbauer records do not mention the stable. or his involvement in the stable. The PA railroad maps, which we included in your documents, and you probably all reviewed that, from 1897, 1900, 1908, confirmed that the house was built in the early 1890s, confirms what Wendell and Smith account records say. And it also confirms that between 1897 and 1900, the garage was built. So that was good information for us. And this corresponds with notes that we read from the Radnor Historical Society Bulletin by Frederick Platt, who also wrote a book on Horace Trumbauer, that stables often got ordered separately, not necessarily from the same architect of the residences. By 1896-97, Trumbauer was much better known and working on larger commissions. I know 1896 and 97 is when he worked on Linwood Hall in Elkins Park, and that's one of his biggest mansions that he designed. So he was working on very large commissions by that time. And a comment that Greg made to me was that, and it sort of confirms what we were finding, is that these secondary buildings were often afterthoughts. And they were designed, rather than with the spec house, they were often designed later by the owner. And the owner had specific needs. They might have for their carriages, for their horses, they might need a second story for storage. They often design these buildings. They were afterthoughts. They were designed by the homeowner. And so that all made sense, and it corresponded with what we had sort of discovered. In looking at the stable structure, I just wanted to make a couple of comments because I think they're helpful. Not much of the stable honestly remains. And we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. The part that faces Luella has been completely removed. And I did include a little graphic in our submission to you that shows the sort of T-shaped structure as it was originally and how the whole front section had been removed. So that's gone. The face of the structure has been completely remade over the years. The roof, of course, has been replaced. What was a shingle-style building has now been changed to a half timbering and stucco. So the look of it has been completely changed over the years. And in some ways, I mean, some of the things that Ed and I have talked about is it's been changed in such a way that it's not flattering at all to the structure, because you have sort of half timbering and stucco over top of siding, which doesn't really make sense with the Tudor sort of aesthetic that the house and the garage have. It's stick built. There's no masonry or heavy timbers.
One quick question for you.
Yes.
As far as the carriage barn's footprint that's there, is it original? The original dimensions when it was first built, as far as its footprint goes? Its dimensions? No.
The whole front section, the whole front footprint of the building has been removed. So it had a rectilinear gambrel form, and then it had a gable form that came into it at the front of the building. And there's a similar structure. If you look at photograph 17, this is 2 doors down to the south. So you see 17 there, which is right here. That has a similar kind of situation. That's a gambrel building behind, which was the original. It's a similar size mass to the to 326, but all that remains at 326 is the mass behind. This part. You can't. The whole front section, the gable section, has been removed from 326. So the footprint has changed dramatically in that regard, and you can even see all the evidence on the interior of the building that the beams are all there to support where the gable came into the gambrel roof. So we can see that it's been modified significantly. And it's a little bit clumsy, the design of it, which also sort of confirms for us that probably wasn't something that was designed by Trumbauer, with a gable coming into a gambrel roof. It's kind of a unique form that I haven't seen from him or really from other architects that design shingle or Tudor style structures. So that's kind of our sort of summary of the issues related to Trumbauer, related to the timing of when it was built. If I can, I'll just go with this follow-up question because it's somewhat interrelated. And that is, do you need, this was another question, do you need to remove the existing carriage barn structure? And does this need to be done at this time? Which was a good question, and one that I was a little bit stumped by, to be honest, in part because I was thinking, is it technically feasible to build the other structure, the other garage, without removing the stable structure? But in thinking about it a little bit more, first of all, we looked at the Gradell report again. I've worked with Gary Gradell for 25 years. I didn't go to him because he's the kind of structural engineer that might recommend the demolition of a historic building. I work with him exclusively on historic buildings. So we work on historic buildings together. And so he's the kind of guy that's going to give me a very honest appraisal. He's not trying to tear down historic buildings. In fact, it's the furthest thing from him. But I think his honest appraisal was the building's in poor condition, it's structurally unstable. If you were to have a weather condition, which we're having more and more of them, that was significant, like wind, snow, other conditions, he's very concerned about that structure. And it sort of confirms what the homeowner told us when we first got started with the project was, we don't even let our kids into this structure. And we keep it locked because we're concerned about it. We went in it, and it's all over the place. It's just a typical sort of frame building, but it is racked. The floors are not level at all. Could be 6 inches between one side and the other. So the building has moved significantly over the years, and Gary just acknowledged, I have real concerns about this building. So our feeling is, in the short term, it needs to be completely dismantled to address these safety concerns. We feel very strongly about that, as does the homeowner. And I would further say that the historic stable structure has been significantly compromised structurally and architecturally over the years. By removing the front of it, as we talked about here, you've lost a lot of that structural integrity because you had this piece that abutted the gambrel roof. It's no longer providing sort of that lateral stability. It's not there anymore. So I think that's part of the reason that this building is so compromised. But even the materials, the detailing, much of the structure is gone. It's not the original structure that it was. The carriage doors are gone. The shingle style look is all gone. It's all been replaced by half timbering and stucco. The original roof is gone. So really the original look of the building has been completely changed. The other thing that you probably saw, which is kind of unique to this building and maybe suggests that it was designed by a homeowner rather than an architect, is on that, in the 1900 and the 1908 maps, you'll see that you come in on the north side of the house. You have a porte-cochere there. It all works very well. And then normally what you would think would be done, you would locate the stable then on the north side of the house in the back. And that's how the house to the north is done. It's a historic stable as well. And you go in the drive on the north side of the house, and the garage is there. Well, in this case, for some reason, they put the barn, the carriage barn, in the complete opposite corner. So when you look at those historic maps, you have to wind your way through the whole back of the property in order to get to the carriage barn. So from a functional standpoint, it's not practical at all. From an impervious standpoint, you have to cover the back of your yard with impervious treatment if you want to use it as a garage as it was originally designed. So I think those reasons all make it very problematic, this building. It's worth mentioning, too, that the cost to restore, and this may not be a primary consideration, but certainly it is for the homeowner. The cost to restore and rebuild this stable structure is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet at the end of the day, it would have no use because they can't put their cars in it. They really can't put their pool things in it. Because of its location, it makes no practical sense whatsoever. So for those reasons, both historic and practical considerations and safety considerations all together, we feel very strongly that the building needs to be removed. And so that's what we're recommending, and that's what we've
Quick
shown
question.
you.
How
Sure.
long has the property owners been the custodians of this property?
A year. We moved in September of 2016.
Okay.
Okay, did you have anything else to add on the carriage barn?
No, I
Okay.
think that's my summary.
Okay. At least as far as stables, sometimes stables were put in out-of-the-way places for a number of reasons. Maybe someone in the household just couldn't stand the noise of horses baying, for example. So that is one reason why that probably is more unwieldy getting down there than the other neighbor, et cetera. Because I've seen these too, where it's
Right.
like, okay, why is that? Well, maybe someone again who's elderly in the family, whatever, might have been there, and drives an elderly person crazy in the middle of the night to hear several horses baying at 2 a.m. in the morning. Beyond that, I did a little further research on this property, and I'm going to share a little bit of a different take than what you've presented in your reasons. I'm not sure exactly what my conclusion is going to be, considering I think in general you hit a lot of main points which are very important to the homeowners, especially, I'll say, the question of costs. And I think it's something that just that we need to be aware of in that regard. So I'm glad that that question was asked and answered. But I want to give another take on the carriage barn, and if you have any opinions, please share them.
Will do.
But
Thank you.
let me give the whole reasoning that I have here. Okay. My opinions on the carriage barn at 326 Llewellyn Avenue in Wayne, Pennsylvania. The main house was designed by Horace Thrumbauer in his early years of solo practice. Again, Thrumbauer is a noted architect in the architectural history of the United States. For example, Thrumbauer designed 222 West Rittenhouse Square, an apartment building on Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, a slim design that towers 27 stories. That area is well-traveled and visited, and numerous events take place there on this square today. Thrumbauer also designed the whole campus of Duke University,
Yep.
the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Free Library of Philadelphia, among many others. In the architectural literature, it is noted that Thrumbauer did not do hands-on design in his later years, but entrusted those designs to architects that worked for him,
Yes.
including the first black graduate of Penn's School of Architecture, Julian Abel.
Yes.
Is that
he
his
did
name?
Duke.
Okay. So with the carriage barn, in my opinion, it should possibly be repaired. Now I'm doing more of a caveat than the language I have in here, rather than demolished, because it is part of a house designed by Thrumbauer in his early days of solo practice. And the design of the house can be attributed to him directly. Also, the carriage barn fulfilled a distinct purpose for a house that was built in the pre-automobile era, specifically to house carriages and horses in a day when carriage horses still hauled people around. As a citizen noted at our last meeting, the carriage barn seems to have appeared on property maps a few years after the house was built, and I think you've also answered that question further and reinforced that. The carriage barn is an outbuilding, surely, but considering the significance of the main house's architect, and in my opinion, this outbuilding served a distinct, unifying, specific purpose in the pre-automobile era to the main house, I continue to advocate for its repair rather than demolition. In my opinion, my suggestion to the homeowners here is reasonable, at least as far as what I'm presenting here in my arguments. Also, in my opinion, outbuildings can have historical and unifying significance. In the local area, one such structure is an outhouse built in circa 1800 of stone on the Harriton House grounds in Bryn Mawr. I've seen it several times, and as I've attended various events there, and I encourage others to go and see it too. I doubt that this outhouse, or to use an old term, privy, will ever be demolished in our lifetimes. One source that has given me insights into Horace Thrumbauer's life and architectural designs is the book Puritan Boston and Quaker Philadelphia by the late E. Digby Boltzel, a noted professor of sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. Another source I've found helpful on the unifying and purposeful nature of outbuildings in architectural design is Seen But Dismissed, Designed But Disguised Outhouses at Single-Family Dwellings in the American Mid-Atlantic by Kate Regev, published in American Architecture, Fall 2011 edition. Lastly, someone once wrote that architecture is frozen music. If so, if this carriage barn was demolished, a significant low note, a B flat perhaps, would be missing from 326 Luella Avenue, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for your comments. I mean, I think there's a few things that come to mind. I mean, one is that, and I think one of the difficulties in this situation, especially, is, you know, our firm does, and really myself, I do a lot of preservation and restoration projects, and that's what I've been doing with John Milner for 20 years. One of the most important things in all of those projects is that a building have a function and a use. If it doesn't have a function and a use, and I think that's one of the problems with this building, is its function and its use. And it's actually a relatively large building. It's the size of a 3-car garage. So it's not a small, I mean, it's the same size as the building that we're proposing on the other side of the lot. But one of the difficulties I think that we have, because we've thought about how could this building be used, is that it has no function. And one of the keys to preserving historic buildings we've found is to give them life, is to give them a purpose to go forward, not just as a piece of sculpture in your backyard, but as a, and especially given the size of this building, for it to have purpose, for it to have function. And that's one of the difficulties here, is the purposes and functions for a building like this in that location don't exist. So that's one thought that I have. I mean, I appreciate, and certainly we advocate for the same things that you spoke of. We advocate for that, and we've restored privies. We're working at Shaker Village now that has all kinds of different historic structures that are very important to, including privies, including water houses, including all the variety of beautiful historic structures that you would have on a property. I also go back to the way the building has been significantly changed over time. I mean, the more we looked at it in the last month, the more we were struck by how this building has been modified. Nothing remains almost from what it was when it was originally built as this carriage structure, as this stable structure. The front has been removed. It's been changed from a shingle style to a Tudor style. The Tudor style doesn't make any sense because you're putting stucco and the appearance of heavy timbers on top of a wood siding building. So it's not a flattering structure anymore. It's not what it used to be, which probably was a beautiful structure when it was originally built. May have been. But it's been changed so much over the years that it no longer retains that original fabric or beauty. And I think that, and then combined with the cost, with the structural implications of what needs to happen immediately, how do you pay? If you're going to remove it, which it needs to be, it needs to come down and then either be rebuilt or something needs to happen, but it does need to be addressed. And the only way to do that is to remove it. And that's been the struggle for us. I mean, when we first got involved, we had discussions with the owner about the structure. And that's been part of the hard part of this, is that we're weighing many of the same things that you are, but then also weighing the use, the structure, the safety, all of those factors that are very important.
So this property is absolutely gorgeous. It like the home, it's beautiful, and that piece of it appears to be, at least from the outside, beautifully maintained. Generally, your designs for the building that you want to add are beautiful as well, and they look like they match the original property. I know we only had a few questions about massing because we didn't have enough information in the package, but when it comes to this other building, it's not your fault as property owners that it is in this condition, but you did purchase the property knowing the condition that it was in. And to say that it has no use, even though you want to build a structure of the exact same size on the other side of the property, is not a very convincing argument. And I understand that it's going to take a lot of money to bring it either back to what it once was or to bring it into some new creation or form. But I know in the past we've had evidence of like the inability to fix a structure. We've had recommendations placed in front of us for demolition by companies, organizations that did not feel a building was salvageable. This one sounds as though it's salvageable. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, but there's also a cost of tearing it down as well. I don't know what those would balance out to be. But
they're
I find
not anywhere near one
I'm
another.
sure.
I mean, it's
I don't know that I can vote to say it's okay to tear a structure down that's 1900 or older without something telling me that it needs to be taken down. So I don't want to, I feel as though you're trying to do the right thing here. I just don't know that I can give a recommendation saying that it's okay, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the idea that you could somehow use this as a garage structure, because I don't think you can. You can't use this as a garage structure. So it has that use which is the use that it was, cannot be used anymore. It's not possible from an impervious standpoint that you were to take a drive the whole way through the backyard and create an area outside of the garage for you to pull in and out.
Right, but you're talking convenience again. And unfortunately, we have to look at the historic areas and say, you know, people want attached garages. It's more convenient. Well, this is a historic area, and the garages are generally not attached. So we have to, a lot of times, say, no, you can't attach a garage. So it's not about convenience, and that isn't an argument that really we can even decide on. So if it's an impervious situation, it's one or the other, that's not in our wheelhouse to decide, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I don't know if you as homeowners have anything else that you want to offer that come to mind. I mean, I feel like the structure has been so significantly changed, and I think the structure is a safety issue. I do think the structure needs to come down. And I think Gary pretty clearly lays that out, the things that need to be done to the structure in order to make it safe. And what he really outlines is, honestly, it needs to be completely rebuilt. So the structure does need to come down. That's very important because it's not safe the way it is now. So I guess that's a significant struggle on our side, is we need to do something with this structure. It's not going to, I mean, I drove for years and years and years, I'm in Chadds Ford, I drove past a barn that, on a beautiful property, that whoever was in charge said they couldn't tear down. Well, they just let it go, and eventually it fell. But that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid here. We're saying this structure is in very poor condition, and if we had a large snowstorm, Gary's not going to say that structure is not going to be imperiled by it. So that is one of the hardships that we have here, is, you know, it needs to be safe, not only for the family, but also for the community and for kids that could be playing around it, that kind of thing.
I agree with Janelle that I think it's an absolutely gorgeous property. And I think my take on it is perhaps slightly different. I agree that it would be incredibly helpful to have an objective third-party engineer who would be able to come in. I'm not exactly sure how we would ever accomplish that with the township, unless it got to the point where there were citations involved. But I also think, and Bob, I think that you're quite eloquent and you did a tremendous amount of research on this. But we're still speculating on why it was placed there. You know, we're speculating on a specific reason that it was placed where it was. But what I haven't seen, and I haven't heard anybody else having seen, is that the original design was opposed to having a structure that was closer. The fact that this structure, the construction techniques, the current state of the condition, you'd end up having to tear this down. I mean, you'd have to excavate. You'd have to put in a new foundation, from the report that was read, and then you'd have to build it back up. And build it back up to what?
To what?
Build it back up to the design that it's in now, when it's already been altered from its original state. Or try to put together a design that would liken it to the house, to the main structure. So in my opinion, I think the designs are beautiful. I think that you've done a tremendous amount of work in order to be able to have the new outbuilding match so closely the design of the original structure that if you were to say, okay, well, we need to redo the barn, you'd probably end up coming up with something that was fairly close to what you've designed, just in a different location. And I guess my feeling on it is that ultimately, being able to preserve the look, the feel, the intent, if we know what the original intent was, is very important. Being able to preserve that, or to kind of resurrect that from a structure that's that's a hurricane away from not even existing, I think is asking too much of the homeowners. I think that, my feeling on it is, so long as the new structure is something that we can come to terms with, that is closely matching in adherence with the essence of the main structure, I think it should be allowed.
Thank you. Do you want me to move on to the other two questions regarding the new structure, or do you want to continue?
I have a great deal of respect for John Milner. I go back a very, very long way. And know that you've done, have a great deal of respect for the architecture of the period. And I'm practically the kind of tree hugger that will do anything to preserve an original property. But I can see that so much has been done to this that there's no vestige left of the original. It has been so altered. I don't feel about this property the way I did about North Wayne, which was demolished. And I think you've got a different kettle of fish here, one that we can't definitely attribute to the architect. My house was built almost exactly the same time as this building, and I too have doorways that go like this, and I think it goes with the turf. But if a structure could replace it that mirrored the intent, at least of the original, is that your intention? Or will it be grass?
Well, I don't know exactly what the homeowner is going to do with the space.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the intent would be that it would be landscaped.
Yes, we would plant trees,
Yeah.
grass and trees, and that's all.
Well, I think it's unfair to ask, a restaurant, to the homeowner, to ask that this be saved. And I don't usually say this, I may never say it again, but in
I
this
don't
particular
usually say it either,
case.
and I'm not usually in this situation.
Well, I'm not either, believe me. This is not, tearing down is not my job, ever. But in this particular instance, I think you've presented a case historically, structurally, and functionally.
And what's interesting, I think Miles made some good points that I honestly didn't make, but we had sort of considered, and that is, I'm not even sure how we would rebuild this structure. once we took it down, because it has been, I mean, the house has been significantly altered too. It was really a shingle-style house, and at some point it was made into more of a Tudor house with the half timbering. And it worked quite well in the house. I mean, that's what's interesting. The house is a masonry building, so it has a stone foundation up to the top of the first floor that runs the whole way around. And then you put this beautiful half timbering on top of it. It works wonderfully. The problem is that this is just a very almost ephemeral frame, stick-built structure in the back. And it was never meant to be anything but a shingle structure, shingle-style structure. So it doesn't really, I'm not sure what we would do to rebuild it. I don't know how you would rebuild it, because you don't want to rebuild it the way it was, because it doesn't relate to the house, and we really don't even know exactly what it was. It had this whole front section that, if you're thinking about how it looked from the public way, that is completely gone, because when they removed the front section of the building, the image that you have from the public way has been removed. That no longer exists.
Well, that's very evident in the picture.
Mm-hmm. So at any rate, I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
So I think that we should move on and start discussing the new design, the revised design. Well, I'm just, in my opinion, I think we've debated the existing barn, and we were asked, do we need to continue speaking about this, or should we move on to talk about the second two questions are related to the proposed structure.
Right.
Do you guys have any other topics? Okay.
And we can move on after this, but
Sure.
so I'm torn, clearly, I think. When you drive by the property, I mean, it's sunken below the ground, so you don't even, I mean, it's not a prominent structure. But the intent that we are to conduct this board by includes, educational, cultural, economic, general welfare, through preservation, protection, and regulation of buildings of historic interest. Is this a building of historic interest? I don't know if you would exactly say that, because it has lost so much of its original shape and form. General welfare, well, maybe there is a safety issue. I don't know of any citations or anything yet, but it could become that easily. But on the other hand, there's the educational side. Like, there was this building there because there used to not be cars, and that's something that makes this area significant, because we still have evidence of that. And then when you read through the design regulations that we're supposed to follow, all but 1 of 8 begin with the word preservation. So it's for me anyway, like I understand, and from a homeowner's point of view, I would be asking the same question of us. My concern is just with the positions that we've taken on this board. I personally am not exactly sure what I should be determining some of these words to mean, and therefore, should I be protecting this particular structure or should I not be?
One thought that comes to mind, just in response directly to your questions, and they're good questions, is just sort of the definition of preservation and restoration. So if we're talking about preservation, this really isn't a preservation project, because most of the finishes on it are not, we're not preserving many of the finishes. Like the carriage doors have been replaced with garage doors. The doors have been replaced. The roof has been replaced with shingles. I think if this project were anything, it would end up being more of a restoration project. And then you would have this challenge of trying to figure out what on earth the period of significance for this project is. Are you trying to restore it back to what it was in 18 or 1900? Are you trying to restore it to what it was when the whole site, the house and this small structure was reimagined somewhat in a Tudor style? And those are very hard questions. And then the whole front of it has been removed. So are you requiring the homeowner then to make this structure larger and to build that front section because it's a restoration project? So I think thinking of this as a preservation project in some ways is difficult because it's really not preservation because most of the structure has been replaced. The only thing that sort of remains in sort of its entirety is the deteriorated stick-built framing that's on the interior of the structure, that's all exposed. And that's even in very poor condition, as Gary's report lays out. So I think that the definition of preservation and restoration kind of makes this a challenging project because I do have a hard time thinking of this as a preservation project.
If we want to go on to the other questions now, that's
Okay.
fine.
Just one other quick comment on the carriage barn. On situations like this, I just wish this could have been addressed like years ago with prior owners, et cetera. I'm wondering if there's something we can possibly address that in the future to prevent a structure such as this getting into the condition that it is now. Just a comment.
Yeah. It sits so far back in the site that it's really tough to discern until you walk up to it and have a better sense of things. So the last two, well, the third is really a comment, and it's a comment that you made that we've addressed, and hopefully you saw that with the curved timber. We removed the curved timber. And I think it's much more in keeping with the dormers and other things that you see on the main house. So I think the half timbering, again, we have a stone base to this whole building, very similar to the stone base on the house. The half timbering now is very reflective of the half timbering that's on the house. So that's really just responding to that comment that you made. The fourth issue or comment, and I'm just going to read it as I wrote it here so that I get it as I remembered it. A concern was expressed about the width, mass, and scale of the proposed garage pool structure as it relates to the main house. We agreed to develop a street facade view and to study this relationship further to assure that the proposed garage structure differs to the house structure in terms of scale and hierarchy. And so really that was our intent, was we felt that it did, but we wanted to see it and you wanted to see it. What we've made, I wanted to make a couple comments first. The revised garage design includes reducing the width of the stair block. I will say that from the last, from our last, let me pull out the color elevation. Maybe it's helpful to have the plan here.
Do you happen to have the previous iteration?
Yes.
If there is a way to put it on the screen side by side, I think that would help as well.
We don't have the full-size drawings, do we?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I may not have the full size, but I think it'll still be helpful. Let me see what I have here. Well, unfortunately, this is probably half the size of the other. Let me just make my comments, and then I'll come back to that. We reduced this width right here of this side structure by a little over 2 feet. So we brought it in a little bit, as much as we thought we could. We also pushed this structure. It was all at one face at the, what would be the east elevation facing Luella. We pushed it back. So this is pushed back 4 feet. We also entertained the idea, it's difficult, and we didn't show it here and we didn't do it. We entertained the idea of dropping this eave by maybe 1.5 feet, because we think we could potentially do that and still get a stair. We just want to have a stair. This little piece that comes off of the south side is a hall, of course, to enter into the garage structure, but it also has a nice stair in it that goes up to the upper level of the structure. So we wanted to maintain the stair. We think that's an important functional characteristic of the building, rather than having some pull-down stair or something in there. I think we could, if you felt that it was important, we could probably drop the eave by 1.5 feet and still accomplish all of those things. So we could bring this wall in, we could push this back, which is actually here, and we could drop the eave somewhat. And one of the comments that I wanted to make about that, and this was really, I mean, from our experience, but also from walking around and exploring a little bit in the neighborhood. It's interesting because you mentioned Horace Trumbauer. There's actually a number of Horace Trumbauer houses that are also on the other side of the street, directly across the road from Luella Avenue. So we were looking at all of those houses in the area. And one of the things that we found interesting, or a couple of them, are that to the north, the house to the north, which is, let me get back here. The house to the north has this garage structure off to the north side. So you see it from the road, just like you would see the structure at 326, the new garage. This is a very large garage structure. It's a 3-car, you can see them on the side, 3 cars, and it's a long elevation too, this way. And it has a stone base. It's a beautiful structure. Has a stone base and has, but one of the things I wanted to mention is first of all that it has a 3-car, so it's the same sort of mass as the garage that we're proposing. But also, like almost all of the garages in the area, it has small appendages, bump outs on the different sides. And one of the beauty of those bump outs, appendages, is that it brings the scale down of this larger structure so that it relates to the pedestrian. It kind of steps the whole building down rather than it looking like a massive barn structure. It kind of steps down in scale, which gives it wonderful character. And we saw that both here. You can see the porch off to the side. You can also see a dormer that's very much like ours. But there's also this structure, which is a garage structure, a historic garage structure, similar time to when our structure was built. And it has an addition, a bump out off of the south side. It also has this projecting gable that comes off of the east side. And so I think one of the wonderful characteristics of all of these buildings that are in this neighborhood is not just the mass, the wonderful mass of the main gables, but it's also these projecting structures that come off the side. So we were very much encouraged by that, and how this small south piece would look, and how it would bring the scale down from this larger 3-car garage to relate both to the house and to the pedestrian. And I think we were all very encouraged by that. We feel the garage structure is compatible in scale and detailing to the historic house, and we've already talked about that. We also feel it's in character and compatible with historic and new garage structures in the neighborhood. Many of the garage structures, as I've commented, are three-car garage structures. The south bump out helps by stepping down the mass of the garage, especially at the entrance, and we feel very strongly about that. And I think the only other comment I kind of wanted to make was that the house facade sits back about 60 feet from, and you can see that here, sits back about 60 feet from Luella Avenue. Our new garage structure is back a full 130 feet from Luella Avenue. So I think it's a little deceiving, actually, in this drawing that we would draw sort of them all on the same face. Probably the only way you could really appreciate this would be to do it in a SketchUp 3D model or to build a model of it, that you would fully appreciate the significance of this facade and how this takes a much more subservient role in the way you would ever experience this from Luella Avenue. And if you were to drive down Luella Avenue, of course, now, all of the lawns are beautifully landscaped. And so you don't just have a plain lawn where you're seeing the front of this garage. In fact, taking pictures of the different garages in the community isn't easy because you really can't see them because of landscaping, trees, shrubs, and other things, which would be the exact case here. So we feel very comfortable with the scale and massing of the new structure. Can I respond to any questions about that?
I have one just from a design sort of viewpoint. To me, the garage feels very square, whereas the house itself has so many beautiful rounded features to it. Did you consider at all mimicking some of the triple windows that have like the curved window in the middle? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I mean, I think, yes, we thought about different sort of design vocabularies. We did want to treat this building as a building that is respectful and subservient to the main house. We also didn't necessarily want to mimic we wanted it to be compatible, we wanted it to feel at home on this site, but I'm not sure that we wanted to mimic Trumbauer or to mimic exactly what he's doing. We just wanted it to be of the same flavor. I think the tower is very successful, and Ed and I had talked about this. One of the things that I love about this tower, and we've found other houses that have this tower house. There's one in Ballackinwood, and I don't even know whether Trumbauer designed it, but it has to be. There's more of them. So one of the things that we like is the way that rounded piece comes out, the tower comes out to greet you out at the road. It projects out to sort of greet people that are coming. And the Palladian windows, I think, is very appropriate on the house, but I think this triple window over here for a more common structure like a garage, that makes more sense to us than trying to make it into a Palladian window that goes up into an attic area. So I think we just felt like we wanted the design to be very compatible with the historic house, but we also wanted it to be its own building and respectful.
The house itself is a perfect example of the blend of if it were a birthday, it would be on the cusp of the Victorian and the beginning of colonial revival, and they didn't exactly know what they were doing, so they put in a little Palladian window to go with their Tudor design, I mean, they had no clue.
And there's Queen
But-
Anne going
Yes,
on at that time
exactly.
too, and
So
it's
to-
a mix of all
I
of
think
that.
if the garage style is blending and matches, it's not required that it has a Palladian style window or even a curved window, because in the house itself, it's a blend of
Mhm.
architectures. It was an absolutely transitional decade in American architecture.
Mhm.
1890s also saw our largest population explosion ever, I think, in the United States. Every town that you drive through in the Midwest almost has a cornerstone,
Mhm.
City Hall, built in 1890, 1891, 92. What an exciting decade to be alive. But
It's amazing.
architecturally, things were changing, and major big time. We were
Mhm.
going into colonial revival, and nowhere is it better shown
Mhm.
than in that house.
It's true.
The windows shown on the garage in the second floor, casement windows?
I would expect their casement windows, yes.
Okay. You know, I agree with Janelle, you know, and this feeling, it's like, okay, well, are we taking a cue from there? The fascinating thing about the windows throughout the rest of the house is that you really only see duplication on the front facade and the turret. I mean, the rest of it, there's a little nod. The only thing that strikes me is that, if they are going to have the mullions or the simulated light dividers or whatever structure you're going to use for them, that to me seems a little bit different from what's represented in the rest of the windows. Having the triple, okay. I don't have an issue with that.
I guess at this point, we will open it up to the public, if anybody would like to make a comment.
It's unanimous. Everyone likes it.
I'll make a motion for recommendation for a certificate of appropriateness.
It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand. We have a vote of 2, so we're looking for a majority, but we are missing a member of our board today. So when there's no majority,
May I make a suggestion?
yes.
It seems to be there's a sticking point between two factors. One is the new garage, one is the old barn. Am I correct in that assumption?
2 sticking?
Well,
Or it's like there's 2 different pieces.
there's
to
two
this
different
app- yes.
pieces. So there seems to be a sticking on one, is one influencing the other in your decision of the board? Would the board want to separate the 2 items? Approve one, but not approve the other?
Can we do that? I was under the impression we weren't able to do that.
I am just trying to make a suggestion because I have a feeling it may be in your best interest to get what you want or get the most that you can get out of a situation. If you deny one and approve one, then they have the option of moving on that one point and either appealing or redoing something for the second. If you deny everything in total, then both are shut down, which means you may or may not get another look at this. If you feel strongly about one, but are in agreement with the other,
I understand what you're saying, and I love it. I was just under the impression we were not allowed to split apart applications.
Well, technically, we're not, but it's the same, because this is a multiple, I think there's a point here where we could. I can see where one is a sticking point and one is not. To move forward, you could approve.
So I will throw that out there if you'd be interested in us doing that. The other thing we could do is grant another continuance and see if we have a full board next month.
Before we do that, perhaps, excuse me, right now, we can actually debate the motion that we just voted on, or make a new motion and debate that, which is, typically the case in the procedures for this type of environment.
I would just like to add, too, that I like the strategy where I think there's definitely two different opposing views on two very significant things. The carriage barn and then the new garage. I think the least risk would be for the carriage barn, because no matter what happens, that's just going to be open ground, I take it. Maybe trees will be planted there? Am I correct?
If you allow us to take it down,
Yeah, okay. So maybe, with that being said, it seems like the least risk here would be to go and do what we want to do for the new garage and then do something else with the carriage barn, at least at this point. Maybe what Ray's saying, maybe we can do two separate votes here. Would that, am I
Yes.
on target here?
But also, I see the homeowner wants to say something, so let's get there. They may not want to do that. They may want a package deal with the decision tonight. And that's up to them. They do not have to, they can take the decision of pass or fail. They could go with a come back next month, but they may not choose that. So let's see what the homeowners have and actually get their opinion. Maybe they have another plea or something that the board may want to hear.
So at the risk of, I'm not sure what I want or we want, because we haven't really considered the 2 versus 1. I appreciate the point. I do just want to make the point that for us, it really, and first I would say, since when we moved into the neighborhood a year ago, we spent 2 years looking in this neighborhood, wanting to live here. We are so with what you're trying to do, so I appreciate your point, all of your points. It really is inextricably linked for us from a practical purpose. If you were to approve the garage but deny us taking down the barn, which we really strenuously think is not of historical significance, and I wish you could see the inside of this structure because it is truly unsound and unsafe. We have real concerns for our kids being there and just having the thing be on the property. I don't think we can move forward with building the garage because we have to do something with this barn. I really appreciate, Ms. Snyder, you're asking us the question when we moved in. We have only been there a year, and you're right, it was naive of us because I knew the harb existed. I knew it wasn't that I thought I was just going to take it down. I just figured, well, it's clearly not historically significant and it's clearly a mess, and that when we had it inspected, it was, this thing has to come down. I get that that's not, that shouldn't have given me the confidence. It did, and I am regretful of that. But it will just, I just need for you to be aware, we will not put the funds into it to restore it, rebuild it. I understand the theoretical desire for that, but we won't do that. We don't have the money to do that. We do need a garage. We won't do, it will just fall into disrepair. So we're sort of, I'm just wondering if we did separate it, and as I sort of feel like it's headed here, if it were denied, we would need to understand as homeowners, what would you need to know or hear from us again at a continuance? Like, we paid a structural engineer to give you an opinion, and we went with Christopher's opinion on who we should use. Is there someone else we should use? I'm confident it is an unsafe structure. I think you've heard from our architect that it's not a Horace Trumbauer design in their opinion. It is sort of not of aesthetic appeal for the neighborhood, which we care a lot about the neighborhood too, we live in it. So we'd want to know, what would you need to see to feel better about it next month? And we're not trying to do anything that is untoward here. We're trying to do the right thing, but we're kind of left with not knowing what to do at this point. I hope that makes sense, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
I'd just like to make a comment. I think what the carriage barn in particular illustrates is the holes we have in our ordinance that we want to, I think, address going forward. Also, too, I think it's a whole question here of an education component. It seems to me what we do, in my opinion, is preserve, protect, educate. I think we as a board need to take that further and forward in our ordinance, because I think, at least if anything, if we can prevent these types of things in the future from happening, I think will be a benefit to all stakeholders. And also, lastly, to be of service to the community. And that's why we're here too. Could we do another motion for a vote? Unless anyone has any other comments? Because I think we could do, in my opinion, or at least what I was advocating for, is the best that I can with what we have. Would I have liked the outcome for the carriage barn, considering what I feel and what I've advocated for? Still a little skeptical, but what else more can be done? So with that being said, does anyone have any other further comments on the board?
I want to remind us that this is not the situation we had in North Wayne Avenue. This is not the primary structure. It is not the structure that we have clear historical knowledge of. It is a structure that at one point may have had historical value, but it has been altered so greatly from its original design, and I'm talking specifically about the barn right now, that it doesn't resemble what was once built. And and if you look at the design of the neighbor's garage, great, it's a great cue, but it doesn't tell us much about what was placed there. And then when you add in safety concerns, which I know Gary, and I feel, and I trust him in his assessment from an engineering standpoint. My position on it remains. I feel that that in this particular case, that the barn, they should have permission to raise the barn and to build the new structure. If we had something that said that barn was crucial to the original intent, I'd feel otherwise. Certainly would. If it was part of the original design, then I obviously would feel otherwise. But we really don't have any history of it, other than the fact that it's currently a mess. And if we're looking at our charge, I think protect is appropriate in a case like this, where we're looking at the property and we're saying, well, what is there to protect? We can't protect everything. We can't protect every structure. We need to protect that which has historical value to it. And I don't see the garage holding, or the barn holding historical value anymore. So I personally don't feel like I could stand and say to the homeowners, you've got to do this. You need to keep that structure on your property. You know, I would love it if it weren't in the state that it's in. It's clearly not dilapidated because of you guys. You know, it's been a long time in the works for it to reach the point that it's at now. And that is a shame because of its age and because it could hold historical value if the previous homeowners had taken care of it and had maintained it and made sure that it was updated along with the house. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And I'll rest with that.
I think your presentation is excellent. I'm fine with both, and I can't say that. I'm saying that unequivocally. I don't think anybody is more of a fanatic than I about preservation. I think you've covered your bases. Unlike North Wayne Avenue, it was not deterioration by design. That was a clear intent to let the building go to seed, and then, as I said at the time, like an orphan killing his parents and pleading for clemency in the court. This is a different situation. This building has been dramatically altered so that no vestige of a design, the original, I'd be, even if it weren't Trumbauer, I would be in favor of preservation had we had the original design, original building, everything has been changed. It has been altered, part torn off. The sides have been slathered with a different material. We're not talking preservation here. We're talking about preserving something that may not be worthy of preservation anymore. Just because, I mean, I feel, and as far as this design, if you look at the linear shape of the windows, and they carry, none of the windows in the main house are the same, not one is the same, I should say. And that really is part of the Victorian spirit. That's the way they wanted things to be different. But again, it's a transitional period. And I don't think we should try to match every window because they're surely not matched in the main house. Nothing. They're a mishmash. That's the way they didn't comprehend at that time what symmetry meant. Symmetry would take over by 1900, but in the 1890s it was still very much a blend, and I don't think that we should require going to heroic lengths to preserve the uncertainties of architecture in that period. Because it has a very good visual appearance. I may eat those words 6 months from now, but right, the way I'm seeing that, they've done a very good job.
Well, I've gotten a lot of good food for thought. I motion to issue a certificate of appropriateness. Do I have a second?
I'm sorry, it's already on the floor, and it was seconded and up for a vote. Am I correct? Well, we didn't do it officially because the chairman never gave we were stuck at 2-2. So if we want to retake the vote verbally and show of hands, we can do that. But the original motion was for Miles that it was for approval.
So in essence, you're motioning to re-vote Miles's motion. So I'm okay with doing that. So all those in favor, please indicate so. So we do have a vote of 3, which is majority. So the certificate is or you know what I mean.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and
You did a great job with the research. I thought it was impressive. And I think that you guys did a great job in selecting your architectural firm.
All right, so we are on to old business. We have report on the new HARB ordinance. Is that what you passed out?
Yeah, so we've heard from the Board of Commissioners that they would like us to put something before them before the end of the year. They're hoping that we'll have at least a number of changes that have to do with the main topics that we've discussed, including not limited to the scattered sites, massing, as well as the signage. So what I did was I took the existing ordinance and I tracked changes, because it's not ready. This isn't meant to be like, hey guys, let's vote on this and send it up to the BOC. This is an early draft where I don't even have all of the language in it that we would need to. So Sarah was going to speak with Beverly to get a little bit more information for us on massing and to understand how that's written up, how that's included, and what are the typical guidelines that the county appreciates. So you'll see that's not in there, but I tried to make changes that were in keeping with the kind of the summary sheets that Sarah had provided from the Board of Commissioners. So if you have a chance, please take a look, make comments, tear it apart, do whatever you want with it. Just send it back, and I'm happy to then try to consolidate and put together something that we'll all be happy with.
Okay, thank you. I see no public, so I don't think we have any public participation tonight. So at this point, we should motion to adjourn, but meeting is adjourned.